Chapter 7 Bones of the Cranium. Anatomical references. Process. Raised area, projection of bone. Fossa. Low area, depressed area of bone. Suture, aka fibrous joint. Immovable joints of the skull. Sinus, aka paranasal sinuses. Forepair. Hollow space in bone. Makes mucus. Contributes to the sound of your voice. Makes bones lighter. Foramen. Hole through bone. Blood vessels and nerves pass through. Skull bones. 22 total cranial bones. 8 of the skull. 14 of the face. Skull bones. Frontal bone. 1 bone. Forms forehead. Frontal sinus. Skull bones parietal. 2 bones form the top sides of the skull fontanelle, aka soft spot, where frontal bone and parietal join. Skull bones occipital bone. 1 bone. Forms the back and posterior base of the skull. Foramen magnum. Largest foramen of the body. Spinal cord passes through. Skull bones sphenoid bone. 1 bone forms the anterior base of the skull. Lower anterior of the side of the skull. Sphenoid sinus. Batwing shaped. Sphenoid. Inferior. Skull bones ethmoid bone. 1 bone forms inner eye socket. Separates nasal cavity from brain. Ethmoid sinus. Many small sinuses. Honeycomb. Swiss cheese. Skull bones temporal bone. 2 bones forms the lower sides of the head. TMJ. Temporomandibular joint. Temporal bone articulates with the mandible. Ears are attached. Temporal bone landmarks mastoid process styloid process. External auditory meters. Temporal fossa. Glenoid fossa. Articular eminence. Facial bones nasal bone vomer bone inferior nasal conchae. 2 bones. Forms the bridge of the nose. Vomer bone. 1 bone. Forms part of floor of nasal cavity. Nasal septum attaches. Inferior nasal conchae. Divided into superior, middle and inferior. Facial bones lacrimal bone. 2 bones forms outer part of the eye socket. Ethmoid bone forms the inner part of the eye socket. Tear ducts pass through. Facial bones zygomatic bone aka zygoma. 2 bones forms the cheek. Sides of the eye socket. Cheek bones. Facial bones maxilla. 2 bones forms the largest of the facial bones. Upper jaw. Face. Anterior of hard palate. Largest of the facial bones. Facial bones landmarks of the maxilla median palatine suture. Infraorbital foramen. Incisive foramen. Alveolar process. Bone that supports the teeth. Maxillary sinus. Facial bones palatine bone. 2 bones. Forms the posterior of the hard palate. Floor of the nasal cavity. Transverse palatine suture. Greater palatine foramen. Lesser palatine foramina, plural. Facial bones mandible landmarks only movable bone of the face. Strongest bone. 1 bone, starts as 2. Half S join at the mandibular symphysis. No suture. Landmarks. Mental foramen. Mandibular foramen. Lingual foramen. Ramus, rami. Condyloid process. TMJ. Alveolar process. Retromolar area, facial bones. TMJ temporomandibular joint landmarks bony. Temporal bone articulates with the mandible. Synovial joint. Hinge/glide action. TMD. Disorder, dysfunction. Landmarks. Bony. Condyloid process. Articular eminence. Glenoid fossa. Soft tissue. Meniscus. Articular disc. Capsular ligament. TMJ.